Hi, Adam.
Hello, yeah.
Disregard my previous message. I got confused with the dates.
It's perfectly all right.
My alarm went off saying, you got a meeting in a couple of minutes. And I ran in, tried to connect, and of course, it was the wrong day.
Yep.
I got, as I say to people here, you never know what the day is here because every day is the same practically.
Yeah.
You have no external references.
Well, it's much the same for a lot of people who are in lockdown, right?
Yeah, but this is more than lockdown. This it was the way here before it was lockdown.
Yeah.
Lockdown, pain in the ass, but
Oh, well, the good thing is you made it.
I haven't gotten back on the problem I'm having with dialogue because I haven't been feeling great and I don't have the ability to sit and try things.
Oh. Okay,
I
well,
spend a lot of time trying to relax,
right.
to get rid of the symptoms. Let me put it that way.
Right.
One day I was practically glued to my bathroom.
Yeah, it's tough when the body misbehaves like that.
Well, do you know what IBS is?
Yeah. Yes.
Irritable syndrome. I've had it since I'm 14.
Oh dear.
And it's gotten progressively worse as I've gotten older. Ah, Curtis, hello.
Oh, Curtis.
Hello,
You know who I am?
Joel?
Yes,
Yes,
we've
you're
I
the starter.
responded a couple of times. I almost didn't make this meeting because I got an interesting connection to my genealogy research. And I found a first cousin twice removed by adoption.
Oh,
But I did find something interesting. It doesn't have to do with APL. I ran across somebody who isn't a direct relative, but he's a relative of a relative of a relative. He's the grandfather of the uncle of my great-grandfather, born in 1680 in Metz.
oh wow.
He's a physician. Len is here. Hi, Len.
Hello.
Got your ears on?
Hello,
Yeah, we can hear you. But apparently you can't hear us.
You got to turn it on, Len.
what do I have to turn on?
I don't know.
Well, you heard that, didn't you?
Oh, now it's gone completely.
Is my microphone working?
We can
Yes.
hear you. Yep.
Yes.
Ah,
good.
okay,
Here's
excellent.
Harry.
Hey, hi guys. Hi Lenny.
Hey there, hey Harry.
I see you, I hear you.
Well, good.
So
Hi Joel.
plenty of people in America despite the date. Positive surprise.
There's
Well,
nothing
How we
else to do.
celebrate.
a
What
lot
could
of
be more
people
what
are-
could be more American than APL? Okay,
Exactly.
left-handed Canadians, I know.
Yeah. Good,
Yeah,
but
the A doesn't stand for America.
American programming language.
Yeah,
These days you might just think it is, right? Well, it was under the auspices
I'm
of
gonna say
IBM.
I'm gonna say hello to Joey. I think we've met in the past.
I think so too. And I
Uh,
watched the recording of the last campfire and everybody should identify themselves in the recording. So Joey Tuttle here.
Ah, that's a
Yes,
very good
I
idea.
recognize the name.
And
I know
Harry, I
John
saw you briefly,
Curtis.
but
I was in the mid 60s to up through APL 89. I was very active in the APL community, went to many meetings, and I'm sure you were there too.
many of them, yes.
Both Sharp and the APL.
hey Joey, great seeing you. A real pleasure.
to
It's
see
been
you, Harry.
way too long.
Yes.
This here is Harry Saal. I am sitting in Palo Alto, California.
Oh, that's the place where the stuff happened for real.
Yes, actually, I was part of the APL development group when it was based in Palo Alto in the late 70s, let's say.
Right. So I'm the youngster here. I'm Adám Brudzewsky. I shouldn't really be known to any of you, but my father might have been. My father was Henry Brozevsky at IPSA. His inbox address was just Henry with an I.
And I met him.
Yeah, you
and
met him.
Sent Adam a correspondence about him.
I'm not
So-
leaving. I just want to get something.
No problem. Yeah, you might have met me as well, but as a baby, I used to come along to the APL conferences until like 90, maybe something like that. From 85, I was there in 86, 87, 88, something like that. But now I work for Dialogue, and so what used to be dyadic systems and making, well, I guess the youngster among the APL implementations, but we've got some old timers in the company. Maybe foremost is Roger Huey, and then I observed, well, both my father passed away, and see little by little people are passing away. And I figured that before it's too late, I'd like to record some of the history of APL's development. Joel, just because of your background noise, I'm going to mute you, but you'll be unmuted again if you want to say something.
Well, yeah, let's mute the microphone.
Except, of course, now we can't hear him when he's saying something, but okay. Fine. So who introduced himself? Harry has introduced himself, and Joey, you wanted to say something more about yourself before we and Curtis as well, before we give it over for Len, who is the real guest of honor today, which I'm really excited about.
Yes, I'm curious and excited to hear what Len has to say. He is featured as the main character in my life's worst decision story. We won't go there. He remembers what I'm talking about, and Harry does too. So, but I've been I would say that I've been boycotting Facebook for a while because social media is maybe an evil enterprise. Anyway, because of your work, Adam, I've been encouraged to rejoin some of these groups so that you can record this stuff, because I think that's a very important mission. So I appreciate your efforts, and you do a great job of hosting. So both this and the other stuff that's going on for recording things is wonderful. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll butt in and say, I'm Curtis Jones. I'm in San Jose, California, and I've been using APL since I arrived at IBM as a summer student in 1974.
That's a while.
A youngster.
Well, for me, it's a long time. Yeah. Okay. Len, you're a famous person, but maybe just for the record, you should introduce yourself before you start telling us, and I'm sure you'll get plenty of questions to keep the talk going.
I'm surprised to hear I'm a famous person. Nobody in my family thinks I'm famous. Born in New York, went to Brooklyn Poly, where I was first introduced to APL. I'll talk about that in a second. Came out to Stanford to be a graduate student, where I met Harry. We did a bunch of projects together. I did some APL work there as well. Went to Carnegie Mellon, was a professor briefly, came back, started 2 different companies with Harry over a period of about 16 years, something like that. Retired early and decided to start a museum. So I started the Computer History Museum in 1996, something like that. And I was chairman of the board there for 25 years up until last year, when I decided to really retire. So now I'm emeritus chairman, which is a position of great honor and no responsibility.
That's perfect. I mean, that alone, your experiences at the Computer History Museum must be, there must be no end to what you can talk about. And even if you just cut it down to we can talk about regards to APL and in that connection, there was probably also no end to it. So,
Yeah, there's a little bit about that too. So I actually wrote some notes, and let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. Is that working? You see a text file that says my history with IBM?
we do.
Yes, okay. So it started with me, it was all for 360, the APL version of 360, started for me 53 years ago. And there are three separate phases. One is the Brooklyn Poly phase, the second is the Stanford phase, and the third is the Computer History Museum phase. So I was a physics undergrad at Poly from 1966 to 1970. We originally had an IBM 7044, which was a wonderful machine, and I learned programming from Richard Larry there. But then we got an IBM 36050, and during some of the day, we would run the new version of APL for that. So I was an APL user there. I became a code tweaker. You know, APL came with all the source code, so you could, as did OS 360, by the way. So you could tweak it and play with it and do all sorts of fun things, which I started doing. And for some reason, the Computer Center let me do it. And IBM got wind of this, and you know, I was kind of a systems programming type and was in the guts of the operating system. APL, as you know, on the 360 ran as its own independent combined operating system, time sharing system, file system. It just over the whole machine and did everything. And IBM hired me in the summer of 1969, in between my junior and senior year, to work on putting APL as a subtask of MFT. More of that about in a second. So who did I work for? I was actually hired by the White Plains Marketing Organization. I think it was Al Rose, although I'm not 100% sure. He was a guy who wrote a bunch of APL books and about you know, using APL for education and so forth. But from a technical point of view, I actually reported to a couple of the guys at Yorktown Heights, mostly Dick Lathwell, and a little bit of Aidan Falkoff. And they were a little suspicious of what I was doing. I don't think they were terribly happy about the idea of running APL as a subtask of some other operating system. But they, you know, gave me the information I needed, and I probably met with them every couple of weeks or something like that and did that. And what I was doing was working on running APL as a partition, as a task of OS 360 MF2, multi-programming with a fixed number of tasks. This was an interim operating system on the way to what they were hoping to be a real, you know, multitasking operating system called MVT, multi-programming with a variable number of tasks. But MVT was late in coming, had all sorts of problems. So MFT actually lasted for quite a while and was a stopgap until they eventually did get MVT. Well, I worked hard. I wound up showing up at, maybe it was White Plains, where they had a 36050, you know, in the middle of the night to work on the machine when nobody else was there, because I was doing all sorts of low-level systems programming stuff, taking over interrupts, and I worked for probably 6 weeks during the summer trying to get this thing to work, and I failed. It was one of the inglorious failures of my life, and part of it was, I don't know if anybody knows about program status words and how they're used to control the status and the tasks of on a 360, but it really wasn't designed for multitasking. So you had to go through this elaborate, you know, stealing and returning and tracing scheme to be able to run multiple tasks and do interrupt level context switching. never was able to get it to succeed. At the end, I tried to refuse my last paycheck because I didn't think I had done the job. They were probably paying me, I don't know, $1.50 an hour or something like that, which was the minimum wage at the time, but they made me take my paycheck anyway. So that was my first exposure to the innards of APL, and the first and only time in my career that I ever worked for IBM, or in fact any other big company. I never liked working for big companies. So when I graduated from Brooklyn Poly in the spring of 1970, our graduation was canceled because of the protests about the Vietnam War, but I got my diploma anyway. And in the summer of 1970, I packed everything I owned into the Dodge Dart. I had the yellow Dodge Dart and drove over a period of about 6 weeks or 8 weeks from the East Coast to the West Coast to Stanford with, incidentally, the source code of the XM6 version of APL in the trunk of my car, you know, getting baked by the sun and overheated. And of course it was purloined. I had, you know, this was copyright IBM material. I had no right to have this tape in my car, in my possession, but I did it anyway, and I headed off on my adventure. By the way, I had never been west of Philadelphia in my life. I had never been on an airplane in my life. I mean, I was pretty provincial from New York City. So I got there, started as a graduate student in computer science at Stanford. The tape goes into a box in my studio apartment, which is over a Chinese laundry in Belmont, which is what, 20 miles north of Stanford, because gas was cheap and prices were cheap in Belmont. I was able to get my studio apartment for $90 a month, which was good because my stipend from the NSF to go to school was $200 a month. So 90 went for my rent and 120 went for everything else, including food and books and surviving. So I was at Stanford as a graduate student from 1970 to 1977, all told. I spent a lot of my time there up at SLAC, which is where I met Harry in the summer of 1971. And in about 1974, I took that source code tape out of the box in my apartment and brought it into SLAC, read it, and implemented APL as a job, as a task under their Milton time-sharing monitor. So they had a homegrown time-sharing monitor and a homegrown, you know, text editing system called Wilbur. But Milton was the time-sharing monitor that Wilbur ran under, and I made APL run under that as well. And that was actually pretty successful. I may try to change my sharing. I'm not sure I know how to do that.
You should have a little and symbol next to the green share screen at the bottom. It should allow you to choose a new share.
I have 3 Zoom windows. I don't see that on any of, oh, there we go, new share. Okay. So yes, this I found is the only documentation of that project. Do you see a memo to Richard Carr?
Yep.
Okay. So this is dated in January of 1975. The only documentation I found about this Orville implementation, saying that APL now is a multi-user system. Originally, it was a single-user system running under the new version of Milton. What I did for saving workspaces was make them files within a PDS, a partition data set, which was one of the data set formats on OS 360. And it was one of these formats where when you delete something or save a new version of something, the old thing gets marked as unused, but of course the space isn't reclaimed. So every once in a while I would attach, call as a task, a copy, a version of IBM's utility IEB copy, which would condense the the PDS so that you could continue to load and save without eventually running out of space. So one of the compromises one has to make in implementing a standalone system under an existing operating system. What else is interesting? Yeah, the normal kind of backspace attention for deletion didn't work because attention was co-opted by Milton to do something else. So I wound up using uppercase backspace and lowercase backspace for two different purposes. So lowercase space without shift was character deletion, and uppercase backspace was used to form the overstrike characters. And we were using 2741, so we had the APL type ball, and it actually worked pretty darn well. So I was pleased with that. Let me go back to the other screen.
So which year was this?
That was, it was 74, 75, something like that.
And any users who had access to Milton could log into APL
That's correct.
at that point, whenever it was run.
So here you kind of implemented files, right? Before they were commonly used.
Well, what do you mean I implemented files?
Or at least
it was
from-
just loading and sharing, saving workspaces.
Right.
Yeah,
in
but
the-
There were no file extensions. This is
No, I
Workspaces went into the PDS.
Yeah.
Right.
The whole workspace, and the workspace was, what did I say in that thing about how big the workspace was?
34K.
Yeah, the workspace is about 36,000 bytes. It said, and my comment said, this should be doubled at least in the near future. It's not clear that I ever did that.
oh, it was a hard limit.
Yeah.
Or
I'm not sure, I don't recall whether the limit was a Milton limit or was the limit in the APL code itself. I
It
don't
was
know.
in the configuration of the installation.
Oh, okay. So are you seeing this text file again with my history with
no, no,
IBM?
we actually seen your Zoom window, which is a bit interesting.
Oh, yeah, right, that's not what I meant. I've got too many things open here. How about that?
That's better.
Yeah, okay. All right, so that was a couple of years of dalliance with APL while I was assiduously trying to avoid writing my thesis, which I eventually did in 77 and took off for CMU. And then the tape goes back in my attic and I have nothing to do with APL for the next 20 years. Well, one of my passions in the Computer History Museum is to find, preserve, and publish old source code. So what better old source code than APL? So starting in about 2005, I tried to get permission to release the source code that I had on that tape. You know, at that point, 9-track 800 BPI tape drives were kind of hard to find, although there was still one at Stanford. Maybe it was at SLAC. No, I think it was at Stanford. And I got them to read it and, you know, re-encode it into a different format. And we had on our board at the time, Mark Dean, who was an IBM fellow, famous for shepherding the PCAT and the ISA bus interface standards, and had some reputation within IBM, and he supported the notion and didn't help at all in greasing the skids within IBM to get official permission. We had some record of success with IBM because we had gotten them a couple of years earlier to release the System R source code, you know, an early relational database. So for the next 6 years, I regularly badgered IBM to give me permission to release the APL source code. That was, here's my original request to the lawyer. It's a mistake to go through the lawyers, but I had no other channels to use. So I did a cold email to a lawyer explaining what APL is and why it would be helpful to release it. I tried to drop names like Don Knuth, and we made a little bit of progress. He says, okay, it's, in theory, it's good, but I have a lot of people to clear it with. And for the, from 2009 to 2011, I continued to badger him and others, any chance we can make progress on releasing the APL source code. I'm back again like a bad penny. I tried to give evidence of why this was helpful. Brian Silverman had a copy of the source code, which he wasn't allowed to have, but implemented it in, I guess, under emulators and got it running. And he kept badgering me, in turn, me badgering IBM to kind of make it official. I was dropping other names that I thought might help. I offered to get Larry Breed, who just died a couple of months ago, involved because I had spoken to him and he was supportive of it. And then finally, in 2012, here's the message of success from some other person in IBM, Ken Edwards. I don't know if any of you know him. He was in charge of APL at the time, and he says, I have good news for you. Your request to display the source code for APL 360 has been approved. So that was in March of 2012. A couple of the things we had to do, or at least the IBMers had to do, was to show that releasing the source code would have no effect on IBM's revenue, right? That's always the first thing they worry about. The second thing, and we've gone
in either direction.
In either direction, that's right. The second thing, and we've gone through this with multiple other companies, is that they needed a certificate of originality to show that all of the code was IBM's, because they can't release code that they might have gotten from third parties. So of course that took some doing, because I guess there was a somewhat checkered background of where the source had originally come from. But on March 30th, 2012, we got permission. On April 11th, we fast-tracked approval of a document that the museum, that I signed for the museum, and IBM signed. And we released the source code in October of 2012 with a blog post that you can see there, and it is still there. So it took about 7 years to get permission to release this source code. This is not unusual. It's not even a record. It took me 10 years to get Apple to be willing to release the source code to Mac Paint. It took about that amount of time to get Qualcomm to give me permission to release the source code of Eudora, the email program that I still use to this day. So companies, they see no upside to releasing historic source code, which makes it so difficult. And I've learned over the years that the right way to do it is to find somebody on the inside who's fairly close to the top who isn't a lawyer, because the lawyers will immediately say no. They see no upside to this whatsoever. And in the case of Apple and Mac Paint, it was Steve Jobs. After butting my head against the wall for years and years, I finally got to Steve Jobs, and he said, sure, this is a great idea. So he wrote a one-line email to his lawyer, said, do this, it's a good thing. And a week later, we got a one-paragraph legal agreement saying, yes, okay, you can release it. So anyway, that's my odyssey. That's my three-phase interaction with APL, and happy to take comments or questions. I don't remember a lot from much of it, but I told you what I do remember.
I'm curious about one step. Had you not kept that 9-track tape, and this other individual, I forget whose name you mentioned, who also had done some implementation, I mean, would IBM have been able to supply the source code after all those years?
As near as I can tell, IBM did not have a copy anywhere of it.
Wow.
Now, it had originally been released as a share contributed program, But I don't, if that source code exists, I've never been able to track it down. Maybe Joey or somebody knows whether that exists somewhere, but I never found it. And the Silvermans had a kind of different version and they didn't have all of it. So that tape that was in my attic for 25 years was the only existing copy as far as I know.
I think this points out another side to the problem. It's not just the legal part, it's actually literally the preservation of the bits, the ones and zeros.
Absolutely.
Yes, agree.
Does anybody, Joey, do you know anything about that share version?
I don't know about the share version. My first experience with APL was using it from the Yorktown Center over a tie line from Boulder, Colorado. And that was in 1968. And then in 1969, we installed a copy of APL-SV, not XM6, in Boulder. And I think that it may have been the first out of Yorktown. And at that time they had moved to Philadelphia Scientific Center. It may have been the first installation off of their mainframes onto a remote location. But we had no, at the time I may have had an XM6 tape that I got through IBM channels, but it went into a tape archive somewhere. And Boulder was the place that was where tape drives were manufactured. And my interest in getting into APL was to test tape drives. In fact, the very first ever written 6250 BPI tape, which was a standard for a long time, was written from an APL program through a piece of ad hoc hardware on a Bell and Howell instrumentation tape drive. So
Okay.
the tape was involved early on, but preserving the stuff, I have no idea where you would have found it in IBM. So thank you for preserving it. That's a wonderful contribution.
You're welcome. Curtis has his hand up.
Yeah, you say the first APL that was installed in Boulder was APL-SV. But by the
Yes.
time it was APL-SV, did it not have TSIO? So where did you develop TSIO?
In Boulder, but that's one of the reasons we got the system was to do that work. But I should retract a little bit on that. It wasn't the first version of APL installed in Boulder. That would have been on an 1130, but I had no access to it and didn't know about it. So even inside IBM.
So what did you use to develop TSIO?
APL-SV. And
Oh, so
TSIO was written in
there was
assembly, of course.
APL-SV before TSIO?
Yes. And in fact, one of the amusing things I remember, it was installed with the help of Alex Morrow, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago. Anyway, he came out to Boulder and put the thing on. And one of the first things he demonstrated was how he had a program which would run a printer, a 1403 printer. So you could actually print things from an APL session on a line printer. And we started that and it went zit, 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 like almost the speed of a high-speed terminal. And it was because it had to be translated using dyadic iota. And at that point, the XM6 version and APL-SV, which was derived from it, had a terrible implementation of dyadic iota to convert characters to numbers so you could rearrange them and put it in the right code to go to the printer. So his task when he went back home was to fix that and make it run at the speeds that it made sense and worked. So there was a lot of early development that happened in ad hoc ways like that.
And I wanted to ask about that source code for the APL 360. That's a 360 assembler. When IBM would deploy a system to some customer, if they could afford to buy a full system, I suppose they would never see that code, right? It would, since it's assembler, it's being compiled somehow to actual machine code that doesn't resemble anything a human can read. that's would be what would be delivered. No?
Yeah, certainly what they delivered were load modules that had the compiled code in binary, and it's essentially unreadable. I know the operating system, OS 360, came with all of the source code as well as the load modules. You know, we had it on microfiche and big microfiche file cabinets. I don't know when you got APL, whether the source code came with it or whether we at Brooklyn Poly had some special deal.
Yeah, but why would they? I mean, as you can see, is sitting so tight on their property. Why would they give somebody the source code when there's no apparent need for it? That's just curious
Well,
about that.
I believe they did provide the source code because both STSC and Sharp worked from the original source code.
But they had a special deal with IBM for this, no? Must have licensed it somehow.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, they had inside connections, but
Oh, wow.
Now,
Yeah, go ahead.
was this before the unbundling agreement? Does anybody remember when the Justice Department unbundling happened?
it was about the time I left IBM in 78 or something like that.
Oh, okay. So this was still the time when IBM didn't treat software as a product. It was something that you got when you got the machine. So they wouldn't have at the time treated source code as proprietary, particularly.
I see. Yeah, it makes more
And I
sense.
think the kind of customers they had claimed that they needed access to the source code in order to support themselves. They couldn't rely upon IBM for critical support without, being able to, in the worst case, perhaps, fix things themselves.
Okay, it didn't come with a support agreement like it would today. I see. Yeah, Curtis, just go ahead.
One of the arguments I've heard for the lack of respectability of APL in academic circles is the fact that the academics didn't have source for APL to play with and write papers from. Does anybody agree with that argument, or is that pretty specious?
That doesn't make sense to me. Actually, especially if APL did come with the source code.
Yeah. Also, there were plenty of clones of APL 360, right? Lots and lots of places were able to implement things that were more or less functionally the same.
There are
So-
lots of better reasons to disrespect it.
So I just looked it up. The IBM unbundling happened in 1969. So
Oh, 69, okay.
So APL was released before that, back when they were
Yes.
giving away software.
Well, I, for one, had great fun reading that source code. Obviously, I can't understand a word, no pun intended, of the code itself, but the comments in there I find hilarious. It must have been a real treat to work among the developers writing that code. They seem to have been quite a crowd. Just-
They were witty and bright and funny. It was amazing. I was always disappointed that I never really got to work with them except sporadically during that one summer.
During that one summer.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. The microfiche for all of IBM was unofficial. And there were weird comments. One of them I remember when I was supporting OS 3.6 MVT was, this is a bug and we know about it. I told my boss about it and I don't give it them weeks.
Yeah, the comments were interesting. I agree. The History Museum has preserved a bit of that story in the form of a picture of a whiteboard that was posted outside Eugene McDonald's office. And Roger Moore was making a very unusual visit to California. He normally lived in Toronto. And he was bringing his sister on a tour of our office. And he he stopped as he was walking along and saw this board. He said, oh, to his sister, he said, that's assembler language. That's the programming language that we program the giant brain machine in Toronto. And I was standing there and I said, well, maybe it's Eugene's work on complex variables. And he stopped and went into Roger mode and said, no, that's Charles Brenner's Boolean transpose algorithm, and that's Larry Breed's handwriting. Now, mind you, he and Larry had not worked together for 15 years at that point.
Oh, wow.
And Larry verified that. And one of our office people, Arlene Azzarello, took a picture of it and put a little award on it. And it's now stored in the archive somewhere at the Computer History Museum. It was on the wall for a while, but it's the museum is a wonderful repository of stuff. So that's what Len gets huge credit for. Thank you, Len.
You're welcome. It was really a labor of love. We have about 150,000 objects in the collection now. About half of them are physical and half of them are digital. Curtis, you can jump right in. You don't have to raise your hand.
Well, it's better if only one person tries to talk at a time. One big question is, did you get to meet Larry Breed during that summer in Yorktown Heights? And then you need to tell us the story about how the Computer History Museum got started, the subversion that was involved. It's a wonderful story.
Yeah, that's a totally different story, which I've told in other places. I can give you links to that, but I don't believe I met Larry Breed at the time. I think I met Larry Breed only in phase 3 when I was working on the Computer History Museum. Harry, you must have known Larry, maybe even worked with him.
I think I knew of his work while at Stanford at SLAC, and was aware of what he was doing, very aware of his thesis after it got published, which I guess was at that point. It was a brilliant piece of work, and accompanying it was an implementation of APL or parts of APL written in nothing other than Fortran, which I dutifully compiled and made run, and that was the first APL system I ever used, written in Fortran.
Running on the 36091 or what?
No, it's a 7094, 7090, I guess, at that point. Pretty sure. Punch cards.
Now, where does Phil Abrams fit into all of this? Do you remember that name?
Phil collaborated on those early days with the Fortran implementation. He and Larry were collaborators. I think he's still with us and could probably be coerced into joining one of these discussions.
I've tried recruiting him for my APL dinosaurs, and he just turned it down cold.
Well, maybe he's like me. He boycotts Facebook. By the way, Joel, I'll send you a link to a better photograph of a 5100, which has APL on it. The one you have on your Facebook thread does not have APL. So,
Oh, right. There were different versions of it, with and without, right?
Fine.
I was trying to remember that. Maybe somebody here knows.
I had a 5100 at home for a while. I used it as a terminal and an experimental machine while I was on disability from my company.
Yes, I had one at home for a while too when it was
I
quite new.
would dial up into 6067 running CPCMS, which is where we had APL running. Anybody remember? And anybody remember the 67?
Yes.
We had a 67 at Stanford, which I think was being decommissioned just as I got there. Does anyone remember, is this a made up memory that a portable 2741 that came in two big roller suitcases. I remember borrowing that from Stanford and taking it to my little studio apartment.
That would be a heroic effort.
You
So
saw
a portable computer.
Harry, at an APL bug meeting, you asked what were those two big boxes in an office in Menlo Park? Anyway, I actually got to see them at a Minnowbrook conference 4 years ago when John McGrew brought that two-part terminal.
I think there were multiple copies of that. Al Rose was one of the original users of it. Yeah.
I had one in my, lent to me in my home when I was working with the APL group in Palo Alto. And I particularly remember taking it apart, and you could use one of the boxes sort of as a stand, and then the terminal part, you put on top of it horizontally, like it's a T. And it was pretty stable, as I recall, in that configuration. And I have to, excuse me, I need to go back and correct the record. I misspoke earlier. It was Phil Abrams' PhD thesis that I was referring to, not Larry Breed. And that's available. It was called an APL machine. And I was very interested in programming language or application-oriented operating systems and computer architectures at the time, which is how I fell in love with that work of Phil's. And that was published as a Slack document. I'm looking at it now in February 1970.
You can find a copy of it online. I downloaded it to my smartphone.
Worth reading.
So did he work at Slack?
That is the question.
I don't think I ever met him, but I got to Slack in 71.
It's Slack-114 document. Prepared for the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission.
Yep, you can find it. It's easy.
I actually didn't work with Phil. I had working relationship with Phil when my company took over the work we were doing on SCSC to in-house. And we asked them if they would sell us their system first before we put up 360. And they gave us a price that was, well, the stars were closer. And a few years later, I met Phil at an APL conference, and he said, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it that way. We're now going to sell our system. And I had relationships with Phil after that. He once tried to recruit me for a job, and it never panned out.
Here's a look at the acknowledgements page of Phil's thesis, and a lot of goodies but oldies here mentioned as having supported him. Bill Miller was part of his PhD committee, among others.
Well, if anybody can get Phil Abrams to attend one of these meetings, it would be a big event, obviously. So if anybody knows anybody that can
On
get
you,
to
Adam.
how do I even get
You
to
have
him?
to invite him.
Well, if anybody sees this and knows
Joel?
how to get a hold of him,
Joel,
consider
if
him
you have-
invited.
You have contact, Joel, if you have contact information for Phil, why don't you pass it along to Adam, and he can suggest it, like Joey says, this is not Facebook. It's a whole different experience.
No,
and,
I'm not on Facebook either. I don't
Yeah.
want to be.
Good.
I'm frankly scared of these companies.
Somehow I found Phil, I think on Facebook, but maybe not. And I emailed him, asked him to join us, and never even got a response. I have a number of people on my email who were the genesis of APL dinosaurs, And it's interesting who says yes and who says no.
Well, so can you contact those same people? Who both those that say yes and those that say no, ask them maybe if they want to be on this. I think people consider a Zoom call of a, should we say, a lesser severity than joining Facebook. You put it like that.
Yeah, well, certainly, I think we should invite Jim Brown.
Sure.
He has a lot to add to the history, especially since he was APL too, effectively.
Yeah, of course.
But Madam, send me an email to be my jog, and I'll try to do something with it. I have a very fleeting memory at 85. I'm into a lot of things. I think I mentioned I discovered a relative who was a relative of a relative of a relative born in 1680. I do a lot of work with a lot of things. I have, as you know, I administer APL dinosaurs, but I also administer another group on Facebook, and I do a lot of, I call it canoodling. That is, I let my mind wander through space and find things that interest me. And I've always been that way. That's how I got involved in APL. I learned APL indirectly originally when I read Herb Hellman's book, in which he used the notation to describe machines.
Right.
And I went to work for a company, and they were using STSC, and they were thinking about bringing it in the house. And I was the one who knew APL meant. And they said, the IBM SE said to me, said, he's the guy to support it. So I went from there, and I later went to work for a large insurance company and had to shepherd bring.
So this is Phil Abrams' LinkedIn page. I'm sure it's him. He lives in McLean, Virginia, and is president and founder of No Nonsense Help, which provides tech support for non-technical people. And
Wow.
if you go down to the bottom, it shows him as VP development at STSC. So it's definitely the right guy.
I'll try.
We, Adam, if you send me a reminder,
I will.
I will send you some of the names I have in my contact list. I don't promise anything tremendous about it. If you ask me to, I will try to contact them again, but we have to formulate it in a way that they say yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, yes, I'll make sure to do so, and I will make sure to try to contact Phil Abrams as well.
Well, I can give you his email address. That's for sure.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure I still have it.
I'm not
Now,
sure how with the morality and legality of just handing out people's contact information like
I
that.
found it. I got it on the internet, so it's
Okay.
available.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
All I'm doing is relaying it.
Yeah. Okay.
Len,
Well, the fact that he didn't
I have
respond,
to say that you. Yeah,
since he
he's
didn't
busy.
respond, it may not be an active email address.
It's
The other
true.
thing you could do is message him through LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'll try to do
Yeah,
that.
well, I want to talk to Len for a minute because he said some things about Brooklyn Poly that I had a relationship with because I was one of the founders of the OS Systems Group in New York and worked with several of the people who were at Poly. I remember one anecdote, just that somebody embedded in the operating system there a link that would terminate its functionality. And gee, they thought they had gotten around it because they rebooted the system, but they had put the wrong date in. It was triggered by the date. So they had put a date in before, so the system came up, but when they hit the date, it just went boom. There were And you talked about MFT. That was the first OS operating system I saw. But we got an experimental version of it called EMFT, which allowed you to move partitions without having to bring a whole system down. That was the problem with MFT. You had fixed partitions, you couldn't move them, but it was very unstable. I remember one time we tried to demonstrate it and the gong went off. You know, the 360 had a very loud bell when they had a problem and it would go off. I learned a lot. I was a neophyte systems programmer at the time. We had 3 systems programmers, none of which knew anything about the 360. This was a brand new machine. But we got a lot of support because we were a big IBM customer.
Did you have any contact with the Polytechnic Question Society?
Not really. I don't even remember the name. But
All right, it was kind of a jokes of group that I was part of, but a lot of the hackers in the computer center were part of as well.
yeah, well, you know, one of the things that I will say is I learned an awful lot very quickly because I had to do my first sysgen in 3 months after I started. And in those days, sysgens didn't go smoothly. My problem was it went smoothly, so I learned nothing from it. So when the next sysgen didn't go smoothly, I was out in the forest. But we got a lot of support from the New York System Center, and we got an SE there who worked directly with Yorktown. Of course, EMFT was a piece of software from there, and I could call him and get information that nobody else could get. So I appeared to be a genius. I learned to read the microfiche though. That was the best thing you could do if you were a systems programmer. Read the microfiche as it came down. We were such a big customer that we got the SE information sheets that came down. It came down in 2 sections. One was supposed to be released to the customer. The other one was only for the SEs. We got both. We did install MVT, and from there I went to a couple of companies as a systems programmer. Finally wound up working for a large insurance company for 15 years before I became disabled, and it was very interesting. We even experimented with putting up APL on a copycat IBM machine for one of the departments in the company. Didn't work out very well because they wouldn't listen to me, and they said, "Oh, it's running terribly slow. We're going to route it to COBOL." That's all I can say about that. And the reason it was running slow, I found out, is because they didn't know about array processing. If you're on a virtual machine and you're adding one line at a time to an array, well, let's call it a matrix, all right? It will cause not the APL to go crazy, but it caused the time sharing system go crazy because we had to rewrite all the pages. And essentially you were thrashing. With SV came a few tools that you could trace the programs and figure out where they were spending time and what was going on. And I used those tools quite regularly, but I couldn't train the neophyte APL programmers to do it. They just refused. I guess COBOL programmers will be COBOL programmers no matter what.
You're still looking for them in New Jersey.
Oh, yeah, there's a huge market for this.
I I just reached up and picked up a hardware artifact from the 1971 system in Philadelphia. It's a fan made out of punched cards, as you can see by looking
Oh,
in it.
wow. Yeah.
Its purpose was there was a paper clip taped to the top of a 3705 communications controller, which we had a problem with, and it sort of melted down when the fans quit running in the stack of the machine. So this was on top, and if it was spinning, the fans were on. If it stopped, it was time to declare an emergency. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
kind of beat up. It's been around the, in my piles of junk for a long time, but
My father told me that he worked at the development labs at IBM in Stockholm and Lidingö. He said that one day it happened that somebody turned on the computer without having turned on the air conditioning an hour before. That was one expensive affair. Oh, yeah, those were times. I want to thank everybody who came here. Our hour is up. We'll continue in 4 weeks, and by then we'll figure out who is going to be the focus of the evening or morning, wherever you are. And I really appreciate everybody showing up. Obviously, I can't do this without you, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I'm going to take this recording and make it available for all of history. So thank you so much, everybody.
Well, good. Thank you for inviting me. It was fun.
Thank you for coming.
it was great to hear your stories too.
Thanks.
It really was. Yes, thank you so much. And if you have any suggestions, who you would like to see here, somebody you can get into contact with, and so on, or if you would like another session, you have stories to tell, by all means, Adam@dialogue.com, you should be able to find me, or just contact Dialogue, you can get a hold of me. Really appreciate that.
I have to say one thing. This meeting, these meetings are great for reminding me what I forgot.
Well,
And
John,
yeah,
you warned me that you don't remember any of this history, but then I can see when we get you talking about it, you remember these details. It's unbelievable. So
well, there was a program on television at one time. It was one of the 21 question series with Charles Van Doren. He was the guy who became the keystone of the problems that quiz shows had, because they were prepping some people. And he used to say, they used to ask him, how do you remember all this? He said, well, I have a garbage can for a mind. Everything goes in, very little comes out.
that's good. So thank you so much, John. Thank you, everybody. And I hope to see you all around. It's been a pleasure.
Okay,
All the best.
okay, look, I'm glad to be part of this. It was one of the
Indeed. Take care.